Okay, so welcome to all those watching along with us. My name's Anna. I'm from Manna Therapy and bringing you another podcast today under the discussion of what makes a therapist masterful. This line of podcasts, in terms of expanding our consciousness, has just started to, with the aim of bringing discussions to the table that can be further explored. So, whatever is talked about here is definitely not the black and white and be all and end all, but rather it's a gateway to exploring different topics and themes that we come across in our day to day lives, and perhaps that you are curious about as well. So, today I welcome again Michael to our chat of what makes a therapist masterful. And we've got some juicy things to talk about today, that's for sure. So, welcome, Michael. Thank you for joining to just allow us to expand on some of these ideas.
Yeah, no, it's good to be back. I'm looking forward to this. Mm.
Wonderful. First, before we get into that question, I just wanted to put a couple of definitions down because I find sometimes that can orient us into a bit of a framework where we can then be really creative and just let things go wherever they're going to go. So I looked up what a masterful therapist is. So if we look at the word masterful, we've got in its very essence is to be able to perform something very skillfully, to be a master in your field of work. And some of the definitions also looked at people who have a lot of power and authority. And I think that's an important concept to bring in to the therapy space as well, because there is that power dynamic that can be felt between a therapist and a client. So with being masterful, I believe, is performing skillfully, refining our skills was another part of the definition, and feeling a sense of mastery in using the skills we have, plus our lived experience to help clients and seeing the results in clients. So, in terms of masterful in itself, is I'm taking the explanation of the definition to be something where it's honoring the client and in love, it's us really doing that work to master what we have and what we bring for the benefit of the client. And masterful in itself doesn't have to just be limited to the therapist either, in that the client themselves is the master of their own life. They know themselves the best and they bring that into session too. And so then moving into the other definition of therapist, in short, it's an individual specializing in therapeutic treatment, and that treatment can extend to mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, any other sort of ailments or issues that people bring. So the therapist takes many forms as well. There's many different types of therapists we have out there. So they're just kind of two broad definitions just to place a bit of thought while we go forward. And I thought, Michael, if you would like to kind of recap and link in from our last conversation on what is therapy, we talked a lot about the concept of love and how that plays in. So if there's anything you'd like to link from there as we move forward into what makes a therapist masterful.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Yeah, well, I mean, immediately those definitions bring a few things to mind. Specifically with love, um, because I think what I was trying to convey last time with what is therapy is it's like there will there are unique expressions of what that could look like for people, but it seems that it's underscored by this love. And your definition of therapist there just sort of sounds like a person, with a certain moral aptitude or say quality of values that could be oriented around love as well. And if that's the fuel for how they show up in that therapeutic relationship, then um, that's, I think, a good place to start. And I think the essence of what that is about is it's not like a idea or knowledge. It's actually a process of becoming that thing.
Mm.
Um, becoming love. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense that a masterful therapist would be leaning into, and I suppose this gets a little bit philosophical now, like what is our nature as a human being?
Mm.
Um, to me, that's an open question, but I think it's worth exploring the notion of, the possibilities of love in this context.
Yeah.
I think that paying attention to the relationship rather than the individuals, say the therapist or the person receiving therapy,
Mm.
is when um is more on the periphery for me. I see the relationship itself, how this quality of being is actually transmitted. This is an interesting mystery
Yeah.
that I'm really curious about. And so to me, a masterful therapist is going to be paying attention to relationship.
Mm.
Um, it strikes me that relationship is where all change happens and understanding happens. And so if there's a way to um, influence that relationship with these qualities, say love or compassion, for example,
Mm.
and that's where it makes sense to begin. So yeah, I mean, I've got a few ideas that come to mind, but I'm curious, like, yeah, uh, what do you think about these initial thoughts here?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, the element of the relationship. And I think what we were really exploring last time in What is Therapy is space this space made in love where people can come and really explore themselves and grow out of love to then sort of generate more. And I think the concept of love is something that we'll definitely talk about in another episode, and the function of it and what we kind of mean by it. And I just bring it to having a loving relationship. And when we think about therapists, we are called to have unconditional positive regard and to look out for the best in our clients. And so looking at that
Mm,
relationship with the client and our relationship with ourselves as therapists as well. And I think that's kind of what it all bottles down to. One thing that came into mind with the relationship is how unique and different we all are. And I guess this is a bit of reassurance for people. If you've tried therapy before, and I know this has happened for me, and I don't get on with certain therapists, certain counselors, certain coaches, and that's actually okay. And having your own sense of autonomy and agency that you can choose, and it's that when we come together, there's so much that goes on when two people come together to just have a conversation, or even just walking past people. There's a lot of energetic conversation that happens. And I feel, in terms of what makes a therapist masterful, is there's an element there with the relationship and I know you've mentioned it to me in a conversation before, about being curious and open, and that whole operating in love. So having that unconditional positive regard, to be accepting and welcoming of whoever walks through that door, right? And when we can be masterful at that, I believe there's something really powerful that then happens for the person receiving therapy as they come in and receive that full acceptance, that unconditional love. That's like, I just see you and accept you as you are. You don't have to be anyone else that you would be outside the room. You can explore maybe who you truly are, versions of yourself that you can't normally be. And I think that takes a lot. That's quite a skill to have, aside from our formal training, any formal training that a therapist goes through, balancing that with their, I guess, their heart space, their ability to be human. And I think that's a massive aspect of therapy, the components of therapy itself, is being human. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts in terms of a therapist being not only the professional, but the personal, and how can they get masterful with the lived experience that they have throughout their life? How do you see that as contributing to becoming masterful?
Mm. Yeah, I love this notion of, okay, yes, we're going to acknowledge there is a difference between the professional doing a functional role and they're also a person too. And this idea of this, wholeness of integration throughout life, I feel is very important for mastery. Um, so yeah, there's a few things that come to mind here. I think it's paramount, actually. I think it should actually be part, if people are going to study this stuff, doing one's own therapy, like receiving therapy. So for me, what I think this looks like specifically is that people have healed their own stuff to the degree that they can claim agency over their, you know, over themselves through lived experience. These aren't just ideas, but actually they're showing up in a way where they do have agency. Um, it's not about perfection or anything. This is an open journey, of course, but I think that indicates a sense of responsibility and conscientiousness, not only to oneself, but to the people that they serve as well. Um, and that brings to mind a second point about mastery, which is this idea of interdependence, this idea of the relationship that I was speaking to. I conceive it of as, you know, sort of like a phone call, like there's information and energy flowing between the receiver and the speaker. And that, there's two people here. And the idea is that we recognize our mutual dependence on each other, our interdependence, that actually we do affect each other. And the orientation that I've learned about that I find most appealing is this power with mindset, whereby it's kind of like a boundaries thing. It's like, okay, well, I'm responsible for myself and I care about how I show up toward other people. So behind all of that is, a cultivation of values and, being patient and, tolerance, whatever it looks like, compassion. And that becomes this, like, I think, this embodied thing. It's not necessarily something you have to think through in every single moment. It's I think um analogous to sort of metabolizing these ways of being in the world. So yeah, interdependence, power with recognizing the humanity in other people, and um, I think that's a good way to keep each other safe and to support each other in whatever way is needed in the moment. Which I think links back to what I was talking about last episode with regard to being present, the presence, and listening deeply. You know, and of course through love too. Um, yeah, like considering multiple perspectives and yeah, being curious and open. And I think just yeah, like trying to connect deeply with the moment as best as possible. So I've definitely got some more ideas, but I'm curious about yeah, like what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that's really, really powerful. And there's so many different elements to it that, I'm even going to have to go back and listen to parts of that again because there's so many intricacies in there that are so powerful. And when I just wondered if you could clarify for me when claiming agency, when the therapist is able to claim their own agency, and is that what you're meaning when they have that interdependence and they're able to be present because they're aware of themselves and who they are, or is there some other element to that?
I think agency is by degrees. So I think it's to the degree to which you can remain committed to what you really care about in terms of either showing up for yourself, showing up toward other people, or showing up for a bigger picture, whatever that might be. I think losing agency essentially means you might get I don't know, pulled into retaliation or into an argument. And, sometimes that happens. That's fine. But I think when we lose sight of what actually matters and sort of lose our equanimity, um, that to me is what losing agency means.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And so for a therapist aiming to have that masterful aspect to them, how does the having personal agency, how does that really play into them in their professional arena?
Mm. Okay. It's a good question. I'm just trying to think of a scenario so it's not so abstract. Okay, so I'll have a crack at the question. We'll see how it goes.
Open,
The
it's just an open one that just popped in to, keep the discussion going, keep the
Yeah,
expectation open. Yeah.
no, it's good. It's got me thinking about John Vervaeke, who I've been learning a lot through. He's a cognitive scientist, and he talks about personal participation in a agent and arena relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is that in any context or arena or situation, there's going to be an individual as an agent.
Mm-hmm.
Now, depending on those two configurations, there's going to be different meaning and a different way to relate to the moment. So that means that the agent has a set of identities and the arena has a set of identities, and the relationship influences both of them.
Mm.
So these two are not separate, they're actually co emerging, co arising. And incidentally, this is how evolution works. It's not actually about genes, it's actually about the relationship the animal, say the person, has to its environment. That's how we actually evolve. So, as a therapist, we'll put the container in there that the person, the agent, as the therapist, is there to, um, support the person to perhaps, let's say in this context, heal some relational wounds. Now, the way that the therapist could show up for their client um, is that they model the kind of relationship that this particular client needs to do that healing work. And what I would suggest is that it's not the therapist who actually makes the person heal, it's the agent arena relationship that does the healing. So the therapist is in an agent arena relationship, and so is the client.
Mm, mm. Yeah, and we
Yeah.
interact in this. That's that co-creation because we're constantly interacting. And I know for me, I love for myself and with clients as well is visualizing things because we have so many different parts and versions to ourselves as beings. And when you have this co-creation, every time you're in interaction with someone, you've got this relationship happening and this exchange of information and energy and all of those sort of things. So it makes a lot of sense. I'm thinking for a therapist to really be masterful is to have that awareness. And then on a practical level, and we learn it about bracketing, when you're in a session and your own personal things pop up, because they do, because we're human, is to then bracket that and be able to put that in its own container for a different arena, to a different space. And so for that therapist to be masterful is having that awareness, being able to be present in the room, be present with themselves and be present with the client and the client's experience. And I think also, and this is particularly probably from my way of operating, and it kind of leads into having that psychoeducation, but just having things out in the open to actually be able to explain, if the therapist is noticing something in the client, and that kind of leads into like the Gestalt sort of level of awareness, but to actually verbalize that, I find for me anyway, that's what can really help to bring these other aspects and elements of what's going on for the client into the open. And because it's a arena or a container or a space of love, that whatever comes up can be discussed in this and explored from a place of love and in a safe space. And then it's up to the client then in their autonomy and their agency. And this is, I guess, leading to that interdependence as well. When we have co-creation, we understand that we are independent beings, but we're also very interdependent. And it's leaving it then with the client. And this is something I wanted to touch on, is the client themselves, and I mentioned it earlier, is the master of themselves and the master of their own life. And for people listening, the idea came to me before of we can be our own masterful therapist, because what we go through is so unique to us. And nowadays we have so much access to information about mental health, physical health, emotional, spiritual, all that sort of thing. And we also have that wonderful gut instinct or our intuition, our own ability to critically think and also to be creative in how we approach life. And I think just bringing that, having different arenas, and I know there's a lot of different elements that we're talking about in this podcast, having the arena of the therapy space, and then also the masterful therapist who's in that space, and then also you as a client and the therapist being your own masterful therapist, your own masterful individuals. If we touch back on that definition of therapist, it's an individual specializing in therapeutic treatment. And to change that around a little bit, if you're the individual, whether you're the client or the therapist, and so you have the ability to use your creativity, to listen deeply to yourself, to be curious and open with what's going on for you and who you are. And I know that a lot of times things can get really overwhelming, and it's definitely beneficial to have that professional you can go to. So what I'm saying is, in saying all this, for the individual to be their own masterful therapist is to really empower people that you have a lot of skill and ability. We have this amazing body, mind, and soul. And there's there's so much that can be explored in that. And so it's something that if people, and I know I get this myself, is that sometimes I can feel hopeless and just feel like I'm despairing. And to remember that, kick into that masterful, like, how am I masterful in my life? Because if we look at it very simply, we're keeping ourselves alive. There's stuff that we're doing that are keeping us here on earth, that keeps us living. And so it's like giving ourselves a bit of that encouragement to go, yeah, in how am I truly loving myself? And maybe, maybe I need to get a bit more creative. Maybe I need to try different things, reach out to other people in other arenas that I can co-create a different outcome for where I am. And I believe that for a therapist to be masterful in particular is to recognize also everything that we've said and also recognize that we're not the be all and end all. Our role isn't to impart learnt knowledge or our lived experience or our training, but it's to really work alongside whoever comes into our arena, whoever comes into our space. And like you were saying before, Michael, having that openness, that presence, we consider multiple perspectives and just working with each other to find what works. And a piece of imagery, I suppose, that I quite often operate from is that of a science experiment. And I know I've shared this with you before, Michael. When we start looking at things as an experiment, because our brain can get so trapped in certain systems and ways of thinking that we're not often conscious of. It's something that we've learned, that, like you were mentioning, that evolution, as we evolve and change, we learn from our environment. And so something new can be threatening to our mind and our brain. And so I find it helpful is to go, hey, let me look at this as a science experiment. So it's not the be all and end all. I can still maintain the functions that I'm doing and the foundations and the systems that I've got in place. But what if, that's like the control group, that's what we know is happening. What if I create another science experiment and I have a hypothesis of what might happen? I have my list of ingredients, I have my method. And the beautiful thing about all that is at the very end, you have your conclusion and you go back through the experiment and you look at what could be different, what worked well. And I think a masterful therapist is able to empower and equip their clients to do that, to actually take their own interdependence, their own agency, their own autonomy for their life and go, hey, let's look at it, in this loving approach. Let's look at what's going on. How can I, as the therapist, support you in your journey of your growth, your healing, your learning? So that really breaks down that power dynamic, is that we're not coming with power and authority.
Yeah.
We're coming with love and honor and respect.
I really love this. When um, I think the scientific worldview can be really creative, and particularly in the context of a relationship. My God, like everything you're saying about empowering the person to run their own experiments, try different things. It sort of takes the pressure off to need to know the answers, um, and the definition of autonomy that comes to mind, that I just love. I read this recently, is that it means to endorse one's own actions.
Mm.
In applying the scientific worldview, it's like, okay, like the process yourself because you've lived through it and what works, what doesn't. That is empowerment. That is claiming agency.
Yeah. Wow. That's cool. Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. And as we prepare to finish up, just on that, endorsing that, embodying it, right? It's, as a masterful therapist, as a masterful individual, being masterful in our own lives, the personal, the professional, and really not only for the mental health industry or the therapy industry, but whatever vocation you're in, whatever calling you're in, is being masterful in that, is embodying it, right? Embodying the lifestyle that you truly desire and that you need from that place of love. And I think
Yeah.
this conversation today has just opened up so much that it's not only what makes a therapist masterful, but what makes us as individuals masterful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Totally. I mean, I think that's like if we just take therapist out of it, it's like how do we master ourselves? Like what we're mastering our humanity, you know?
Yeah.
But that's an open question, but I think that's kind of what we've really been talking about today. That's what it feels like for me. How about you?
Yeah, I reckon it really is. Because, and I mean, it's, like the therapist, we are a person. So it makes sense that it's really about how do we master ourselves. And if we look at the therapist as being just a person, so to speak, and therapy as being just a space, just a way for people to have that confidential, safe spot to heal and grow. Um, but at its core, it's just two people coming together and having a relationship in love that's professional and safe and trusting to help, I suppose, each of them really move
Oh,
forward
definitely.
and learn in life.
Yes. For sure. I think I said before, like a co-emerging phenomena, like
Mm-hmm.
it's flowing both ways. So totally, we're transformed through relationship on both sides. That's my take.
Yeah.
Mm.
Oh, that's awesome. Would you like to finish up with any last thoughts or snippets of wisdom?
Yeah, I mean, just two brief last things is I think it is super important as well to have some sort of, and this is again a term from John Vervaeke, an ecology of practices. So not just one thing, but like a series of things that I think are well integrated into one's life. That might hit a few different areas. So there could be yoga, meditation, being in the community, of being of service, for example. You know, Going into nature. I mean, it's all the stuff that you hear about all the time. I don't think it's nothing special. It's just about that these things are chosen and that there's dedication to it. Um, those sorts of things. The other thing is I see a lot of value in an evolutionary philosophy, and the reason I've sort of touched on already is this idea of the relationship. Um, I've done some peripheral reading into this area, like evolution science. And, the old story was that evolution takes place through genes. Well, it turns out evolution takes place through genes, epigenetics, learning, symbolic language, and culture, respectively. So all of that is about relationship. And um, an evolutionary philosophy is really about development. I think there are innate capacities. I would speculate that compassion and love are innate to being human, but I do also think that they require development. And that's done through relationship, in my view. So that's why I'm an advocate for an evolutionary philosophy. There's a lot to that,
Mm-hmm.
which maybe we could unpack in due course. But they're really, I hope that sort of captures like the essence of what I'm trying to communicate. But yeah, they're really the nuts and bolts of what I see here as you know, doing really good work with people in our community.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing all that. What I'm hearing really coming through and feeling as we're discussing is being that masterful individual, understanding that we have connection and relationship are fundamental to who we are, and we always have that. We've got this co-creation that happens when we're in each other's arenas, in each other's spaces. We, with curiosity and creativity, with that science kind of thinking, that experimental thinking, that it opens up possibility. Change and evolving becomes less threatening when we see it as let's just experiment what's going to happen. Um, and that we have this wonderful ability in love to have this interdependence. So we can be our own humans, we can be our own beings, and we can also engage in these relationships, and when it's done in love and honor for one another, I think that's really key to being masterful. And what I hear is also having that structure. You got flies all over
Yeah,
you.
they're just
Fully
like,
in nature,
yeah,
fully in nature. Is having that structure, knowing our supports, and just aspiring, just giving life a go. There's really no one way of growing, of healing, of learning, and to become masterful at that. Specialize in you, I think, is the message I want to really get to people. Is
yeah,
specialize
I
in you as a wonderful, unique, weird, crazy, free
love
human
that.
being. Like specialize in you as an individual and master you, and
Mm,
just find those supports around you that can really, really help that in love. And I'm excited to talk about in our next episode love and the function of love and how that plays in relationships, whether it's in therapy or other relationships, but how that looks.
oh, beautiful. Specialize in you. I love that. That is the call for the week. That's going to sit with me in my heart, and I can't wait for that conversation. That's going to be, yeah, a beautiful exploration. Thank you so much, Anna.
Thank you. Thank you. We will close it there as you have to swat away heaps more flies and battle the flies of being outside, which is wonderful in itself. And yeah, everyone who's listening, specialize in you. Remember that this conversation is open to explore ideas. So if you have anything you want to add, anything you want to challenge, anything you want to question, comment
Please.
below, or yeah, get in contact otherwise. We just want to open it up. If you want to jump on a session with us or either one of us, that's opportunity too, because I truly, and I feel Michael, you're the same, just want to get these conversations happening to
Yeah.
get all these thoughts out there.
Yeah. Uh, yeah. Well said. It's been fun. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, until next time, we'll close it there. And everyone, remember, specialize in you and just live in that love.